Hey everyone, Dogen here. So today I'm joined by Rafal Jaki, who's probably best known to many of you for his work on Cyberpunk Edgerunners, the show on Netflix, and also on Witcher Ronin. To make a very long story short, I recently watched Cyberpunk Edgerunners and it immediately became my favorite anime. I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with it more than I can express eloquently. And so when I learned that Raphael was going to be in Beppu, I reached out to him and he graciously agreed to meet up. So in this video, I'd like to kind of pick his brain and hopefully learn more about his creative process and all the work that he's done in the past. So without further ado, do you mind giving a brief self-introduction?
Sure. Hi, everybody. As Dogen has said, my name is Rafal Jaki, and I started to work in the video game industry more than 10 years ago. For the majority of the 10 years, I was at CD Projekt Red, the company behind Witcher and Cyberpunk 2077. I started off as a business person, then I kind of transitioned into a more producer kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then a few years back, I was in charge of everything that wasn't the video game, but was kind of creative. Mm-hmm. So for example, I was one of the two people that came up with Gwent, the minigame in Witcher 3. Then I worked on a bunch of board games for the IPs. Then I made my writer's debut with Witcher Ronin, mm-hmm. Which was a Kickstarter and kind of a what-if story. What if Geralt was a Ronin in Japan instead of like medieval fantasy Europe? And in the background for 5 years, more than 5 years, I worked on Cyberpunk Edgerunners to make that show.
Okay. There are so many things that I would like to ask you. First of all, I think immediately before recording this video, I read Ronin, and I thought that was incredible by itself. Of course, you didn't live in Japan, but you studied Japanese at university. Do you mind maybe talking about that a little bit more?
Sure. When I was 12, I watched, for the first time consciously, something that was made in Japan, and I knew it was that. And for me, at that moment, like something profound has opened up.
Yes.
And I thought, wow, they're so different, but so appealing. It's that I want to be as close to that as much as I can. And then I went to my first anime convention in my hometown, which was like 200 people or something. And then I enlisted into a local club where there was enthusiasm for Japanese culture and for manga and anime. And then some of those people from that club went to Warsaw University to study Japanese philology. And they were already my senpais from the club. And I made a plan and I talked to my parents, like, I'm not going to get good grades in high school, but I'm going to focus on the things that will get me into Warsaw University Japanese philology. And I really focused on that because it was my dream to get there. And the story of that is funny on its own because it was the year that I tried to get in was the most popular curriculum in my whole country.
Interesting.
It was 50 people for one space.
Wow. Okay.
And there was only 20 available for the whole country. And in order to get in, you had to have the perfect score, 200 for 200 from the the
entrance examination.
Yeah. Well, not from the end of high school exams.
Okay.
Which in the States is SAT, right? And for Poland was something different, but basically the same concept. But so I couldn't get in because I had 190 out of 200. So still quite high. I did my best, but I didn't get a perfect score. But because it was so popular, the dean opened up 20 more spots.
Okay.
But everybody that was in the 100 list, whoever got, then they send an email saying whoever gets first the next day to sign in on the list will get in if they're in the top 100 list.
Okay.
So I slept on the university grounds just to make sure that I could get in.
Nice.
And it was a more of a perseverance thing than kind of a luck thing maybe that it opened up that way. And and I went through 3 years first of my bachelor's degree, and then I went to my master's degrees that I didn't actually finish. I was on the year 5, but I already had a pretty steady job, and I knew that I wouldn't become a translator, or I wouldn't go to a Japanese factory company that for me to pursue that future. And it was always like a passion thing for me. So I already had a good job at that time. So I was like, I can't do job and university at the same time. So I dropped out after year 5. So I didn't finish the master's degree. I did finish my bachelor. But there was an interview before I got in, and there was a rule: you cannot mention any pop culture if you want to get in. If you do, you're not going to get in.
Okay.
Because the thing is
no
that
anime, no
nothing. Because the thing was that, and I actually understood later on, was that if you're not obsessed and that was your motivation, you thought you're going to get into closer to anime because you went there. That was not the case. Like, we studied tea ceremony, we studied Japanese history, like the food culture, all the language, grueling amount of kanjis each week. And if anime was your only motivation, all those people dropped out. I was the only one that actually persevered, because I had that interest in everything that was Japan at that point. Manga and anime wasn't the only thing that I was interested in. So because of that, I persevered. But people that went into just for that,
they burned out quickly.
Kubi in natte shimatta very quick.
Okay, got it. Yeah, makes sense. I think we're similar in that sense, because I, of course, was always a big anime fan, but I wasn't anime otaku in the sense of anime was my life. The name Dogen comes from the Zen Buddhist priest, because I was very into Zen Buddhism as well, on top of anime. And then all throughout high school, I did tricking, which is kind of like freestyle martial arts acrobatics, which was, of course, very inspired by East Asian martial arts. So I was very into like karate as well. So the multiple parts of the culture I was very into. So very similar in that regard. You weren't able to talk about anime though, but one of the questions that I would like to ask you is, what are some of the inspirations? What are some of the works of art, be they anime, be they movies, whatever they might be? What are your favorite pieces that inspired you while working on The Witcher, while working on Ronin, while working on Cyberpunk, etc.?
Well, there's so many, I don't know if I have enough time. But I think there's a couple of pieces of media that really moved me to my core. The one that really changed my life was Neon Genesis Evangelion. And I watched it in files, because obviously I had to pirate them, because in Poland, after the communist time, you couldn't get a legal copy of such a thing. So I downloaded it through the internet, and it was 16 megabyte files. You couldn't see almost nothing. That was because there were like 320 to 240 ratio. But I watched it, and I thought something has changed. I didn't truly understand what, but I had feelings that I'd never had before. I opened up like a shelf that I didn't even know that existed.
Yeah.
And from that point, I thought, oh, that's a creator voice that really was shouting to me something. And it was a very unique experience, because outside of like a family tie, maybe with close friends, nobody transferred emotions like this. At all to me.
Right.
So I think Evangelion to me still till this day is such an important piece of media. And actually the last movie, the new movie that came out recently, I was obviously crying at the end, but I was like, oh, Hideaki Anno is fine now. Like because his work on Evangelion shows like his states of depression. But now after this movie, he's happy.
Interesting.
And I was like, I'm so happy for you as a creator that you know, for
Yes.
20 years you went through this roller coaster of who you are, what you want to express, and now you're happy. It's such a like he just went there and showed to the whole world his whole emotional life, his inside core, and it was such an interesting thing to see it. But at the end, I was so happy that he was happy now.
Yeah, very kind of cathartic moment.
Yeah.
Now, I think this is like the perfect transition to a question that I've been wanting to ask so many people for a very long time. And I think you're probably like the most qualified person to answer this question, which is the reason that Cyberpunk Edgerunners is my favorite anime now is because I believe that it is like the essence of wonderful, concentrated storytelling. And there are no frills, and there is nothing that doesn't need to be there. Right before this, we started talking very briefly about Aristotle's Poetics. One of the lines that Aristotle has in that is, it's very blunt, and it says, episodic content basically is the worst type, because in taking a struggle that becomes episodic, if you try and take the struggle and that exists throughout the entire timeline, but then you add in filler content, it dilutes the struggle. And we don't really relate to characters so much as we do with them going through the struggle, right? Well, that's what I've always thought. And that's what I loved so much about Edgerunners. It was so concentrated. There was nothing that could not be included. Everything had its place in the story. And it was it was split into episodes, but it certainly wasn't episodic.
It's one story.
Exactly. One unified story. Brilliant. And one of the things that I said to you in the car earlier on was, I think it's better than Cowboy Bebop. I might get people that try and cancel me for that, but one of the reasons for that is because I absolutely love Cowboy Bebop. It's a masterpiece, of course. But the only critique I have of Cowboy Bebop is that, to me, it felt like there were a few episodes that weren't related to the story at large, where they would go do something and come back. And in that sense, it felt like the series had a little bit of downtime. And again, Edgerunners didn't feel that way at all. I was riveted. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. Okay, next episode. Perfect. Now, the real question is, Neon Genesis Evangelion as well is a landmark of anime. I've always had a very difficult time figuring out my opinion on it, because another thing that Aristotle wrote in that same paragraph is that if you take a series that's more or less complete, or a story that has these characters, and you try and stretch it at all, you end up, again, kind of diluting it. And of course, with Neon Genesis Evangelion, there was the first season, and then there were the couple like movies that came after that.
End of Evangelion, the Rebirth, yeah.
And then there were a couple movies kind of after that, and then I believe that the most recent movie that came out is supposed to be kind of like the proper end.
Yeah.
Now,
or at least the end that the creator wanted all along but couldn't get to. But after 20 years, he finally got to the end that he envisioned.
Yes. And this is kind of like my question is, I watched the original, just the first, I believe, 24, 26 episode series.
Yeah.
And I absolutely loved it. And I thought it was the greatest anime ever made until the last couple episodes where things kind of get crazy. And I believe it's my understanding that they didn't have the budget to make it as they wanted, or
there's speculation how it kind of came about.
Right.
I think, but I can ask the people that were there, because Trigger actually has the majority of Gainax people that did Neon Genesis Evangelion. But I think it was mostly, budget-wise, time-wise, which is always a constraint with anime, but also the emotional state of the creator. Because at that time was, as I think he talked about it, and there's a manga where he draws he draws his life and kind of struggles, and he said that he was just a wreck and couldn't finish.
Okay.
So, and I think it shows in the work because at the end it's like there's no hope. The wrong choices are made. Everything gets fucked, and it's like, and it's so depressing because it was supposed to be that. Like that was the emotional state of the creator at that point, and I think it transfers to the audience.
Okay. Very, very interesting. I hadn't really thought about it. What would you say about zooming out and thinking about the mental state of the character or the creator? I try and concentrate more on just the
What's
series.
in front of
Yeah,
you.
as it is. And again, in that sense, that's what made Edgerunners so special to me, is it just felt like every piece was in the right spot. But anyway, let's see. When you originally were working on multiple things within CD Projekt Red, and then your first big creative endeavor was Witcher Ronin.
Yeah, the one that I kind of had really creative ownership.
Yeah.
In a sense that was my idea from the start to kind of bring Geralt to the different setting and to a what if scenario. In a sense that what if it wasn't, a portal opened up and the medieval character goes to Japan, but rather what would happen if the character with his own traits would be born in a fantasy Japan rather than a medieval European setting.
Right.
And from that point, it was quite easy to me to make that jump because I'm like, I'm a fan of all those things. And for me, taking like yokais that are really cool and got a little bit flatlined in like the general culture.
Yes.
For example, kappas are like, they're just like this funny, but they were like, mischievous and they had like their own special quirks. And if you could center around the story, which Witcher always is, was like, he is a monster hunter, and the monster and his special things are a part of an investigation that he always does. I thought in Japanese it would work, but also it was the case that for Ronin and for Geralt, whenever we would come to Japan, Japanese people would always tell me that he's a Ronin. Like he is a character, goes from village to village, does a job for a small coin. He just wants, to be left alone, basically. And I felt that is true of what a Japanese typical character or like the Nihon no Tamashi kind of character is. So I thought the jump would be easy. And I hope it was for the reader, I hope it was enjoyable in that sense.
Yeah, I just read it again immediately before this, and I loved it. Now, naturally, there are multiple art styles in it.
Yeah.
Was this something that you had in mind from the get-go, or did you have that idea as you were creating it?
Here, the producer in me kind of kicks in.
Okay.
In a sense that Hataya, the artist for the main arc of the comic book,
Yes.
she can only produce so much art in a time frame.
Right.
And getting more artists involved made it possible from the production standpoint.
Okay, good. Sorry.
From the production standpoint to actually have a bigger comic book. Because she, rightfully so, took more than a year to just do the art for this. So I thought there's a bunch of Japanese creators that I found I wanted to do something with. Let's make short stories with them to kind of showcase different aspects of this world, but still kind of to the core concept of the IP of what is Witcher about. And I love working with artists because I write comic books in a just like Jesus Christ, I forgot the name.
Screenplay?
Yeah, just like a screenplay. Because normally right now in comic books, especially in American comic books, there's a lot of directing and writing at the same time. So the writer becomes the director because while he writes the script, he also directs the artist in how it is done.
Interesting.
In a sense that they will say, okay, so 4 panels on a page. First panel, Geralt looks right. And he sees this and this. The emotion is this and this. Please do it in a blue way, and blah blah. And he's basically a film director at that point.
Yes.
No longer a script writer. He's the director.
Yes.
I don't write that way. I don't like it, to be honest, because I feel there's very little left for the artist to interpret.
Yeah. That's yes.
So all of Ronin was written in a way that is just like, a screenplay, which is like Geralt enters the room, there's this and this and this, and this is the dialogue. And this leaves a lot of interpretation for the artist. That's why I love to work with different artists, because they can interpret the situation on their own.
Yes.
And more likely than not, I'll be delighted with their creativity.
Yes, absolutely. God, there's just so many questions. Are there any? Well, of course, we talked a little bit earlier about your inspirations. The main one being Evangelion. But in terms of writing, are there any, what would you say, rules or guidelines that you try and have for yourself while you're writing, or do you have a routine or anything like that you follow?
Well, I think I'm very much like my teacher here, which Bartosz Stybor, who is also
He wrote the screenplay for Edgerunners?
Yeah. He taught me how to do Ronin, because he's a comic book creator for 15 years now, and he worked in TV for many years before this. And of course, I had many great writers for video games, but writing for video games is very different.
Oh, it must be.
Very different beast. So, like the linear storytelling that you do in comic books or in anime or movies, it's quite different as well. So I learned what I know from Bartosz, just working with him on this. And he gave me 2 really great tips that I try to follow. The first one being the dramatic question.
Yes.
The thing that, if you have something important in your life, there's a question that kind of fills you and you need to explore it. Try to do the thing that you want with that dramatic question in mind. Because there's a difference between story and the plot line, right? Story being what happens if a family member dies. And the plot line is somebody's going to the funeral, they go to the city and they have this adventure. You have the obstacle structure and maybe the hero's journey, whatever that would be. But it's without the question, it has no substance. It's just things happening to the character.
Yes.
And that dramatic question is parallel for a story to be good.
I agree 100%. It's funny you mentioned that. I took a master class that Aaron Sorkin did.
I saw it as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what he says. He says you need to have intention and the obstacle. Yeah. Because if you don't, you're just going to end up writing a story about like the road trip that you have rather than the struggle.
Yeah.
So, very much understand.
Yeah, and in that masterclass as well was the depiction of like, the difference between story and plotline is that the story is somebody is estranged with their family and they want to get together for Christmas. But this could be a comedy. This could be okay. So the thing is that it could be a comedy. It could be a drama. It could be something in between. It could be animated. It could be live action. It could be anything at that point, because you're trying to explore that dramatic question, and the obstacles will emerge based on that dramatic question. So for me, for example, for Edgerunners,
yes,
and what Bartek really, while we were developing, he arrived at the dramatic question that is the final question that you see in the show is like, can you live somebody else's dreams? And the dreams part was enforced in every single piece of Edgerunners to make it stronger. Because then a relatively small piece of like 10 episodes, 20 minutes plus, can have some power to move some people. But without it, it would be just like, think about other things like, a shonen anime. You had 300 episodes. And it's great. I love this kind of stuff. But maybe the dramatic question has to change. Like and you have to pursue, and you have to make sure that the audience is still in with you with
Yeah.
the dramatic question. Because, for example, One Piece has that. It's such a long running piece of media. I love it. Like it's with me for 20 plus years, and it's something that I'm actually very fearful that it will end, because it was said it will going to end very quickly. Like not very quickly, soon. I don't know what will happen in my life if there is no weekly One Piece. But what I was trying to say is that he changes the dramatic question over the course of this of his series, and he explores different questions, and you can cut One Piece into different type of things and take them out, and maybe some context will be lost, but they're very different dramatic questions. Like he explores, a question about slavery, a question about being free, a question of like, is safe okay even if it's oppressed? And there's many of those questions, and he explores them, and then he shifts to another, because it's such a long running piece. But if you have this really important question you want to ask, if you have something inside of you and you cannot find the answer to that question, but it constantly comes back to you, that most likely as a creative, you should explore what happens if you want to answer this question. Because you might not arrive to the answer even if you think you know it. But exploring that dramatic question is something that I was taught by Bartosz, and I think I became a decent storyteller because of that learnings.
Yes.
Of like having that starting point of, okay, do you have something to say to this world?
Yes. Yes.
And if you do, what is it? Like, for example, one of the things that that is important for me is like when I became a dad, like a new dramatic question popped up. It's like, I'm so afraid that something will happen to my kid. And what will happen to me if that happens? Like, do I want to live anymore? Maybe not. I don't know. And exploring, for example, what happens with you as a parent. There's a bunch of really cool video games right now that are exploring these questions, like Last of Us or God of War, where it's like creators that had this question made pieces of media about this. What it means to be a father, what it means to be a parent, what is a loss of a child do to you? Can you re-engage with the world after that happens to you? Those are important questions, and you can see through those excellent pieces of content. Art. I want to say art.
Say it.
You can see that they had this in mind all the time, and every single piece of those art pieces is stronger because somebody thought about it. If there was a problem to solve, most likely the dramatic question will help you in fixing that if something doesn't feel right.
It's interesting you say that. One of my favorite albums it's called Merriweather Post Pavilion by this American band, I believe they're American, Animal Collective. And the opening, it's actually the second song, but there's kind of like a prelude to that. It's like the first proper song on the album. It's called My Girls. And I think I'm getting this right, but it was one of the first songs that they wrote since one of the band's members became a father. And it's such a powerful song. And in that sense, I can very much relate to what you're saying. How the dramatic question changes and trying to explore that in different means of art. It's probably what makes great art great.
And I think, Edgerunners clicked for you, and it clicked for a lot of people, which I'm, so grateful for. It's, having that feedback. But there's a lot of people that it didn't click for. And I go through Reddit and I read all those people that's like saying, oh, it was too short. I wanted to spend more time with the characters. I didn't understand why Lucy didn't tell David something. And because of that, that she's actually responsible for the demise of the whole crew. And I'm like, kind of, but it's not about that, right? It's not. But I understand that they didn't click with the question because maybe
they haven't had that experience,
or the question wasn't relevant for the thing that they have in their mind or they want to explore as human beings.
Yes, that's very, very true. Yes, I very much understand that as well. I haven't talked about this yet. We talked about it earlier. I'm working on this new project right now, and I'm not going to get into too many details right now, but this is something that I've been struggling with, which is, will the people that watch this understand not necessarily what I'm trying to say, but the thoughts that I'm trying to explore? So I can very much appreciate that sentiment. Now, Exploring the dramatic question was, I think you said there were two things that you learned from him. Do you mind saying what the second was?
The second thing was just that you are, as a creative, it's mostly about problem solving, actually, and imagination. In a sense that even if your technical writing skills aren't amazing, there are ways for you to tell your story, even without you writing amazing dialogues, for example. There are ways for you to find that, but you have to have problem solving and imagination. I get a lot of my email is public on my Twitter.
Right.
After Edgerunners, there was a bunch of people that wrote to me about how can I make my own anime? I have this idea, and I try to be as much I don't have that much time, but I try to respond to those emails. And for most of I have this idea. The idea itself is not that important. What is important is that can you make that idea a reality? Can you push through the phase of okay, I think this would be an interesting story. Maybe the dramatic question is already with me, but what happens next? How do you put the work in to actually make it happen? And for many people that I interact with is I have this idea, take the idea and make it for me. And I'm that doesn't work.
Right.
You have to do the actual work with the people if you want to make something. And then, I get a lot of other questions of oh, I have this idea. Should I become a screenwriter? Should I become an artist? Should I become this and this? Pick one lane, most likely, and just go for it. And, if at first everybody that starts something, they were quite bad at it. And
absolutely.
And then they become better if they stay with it. One of the most revealing thing, and it's a different colleague that actually gave me something super interesting. I'm always envious of people that have manual skills of being an illustrator, for example, or a concept artist. And I was so jealous always because I am super shit at it. And I got drunk with my pal. He's one of the greatest concept artists in the world, literally top 100 globally.
CD Projekt Red.
Yeah, and I told him, look, you're so talented. I'm so jealous. He said, and I hope I can swear.
That's fine.
He said, fuck off. I'm not talented. I'm doing this 10 hours a day for 20 years. I put the work in. If you would put the work, you would be maybe not in the same spot that I am, but you would be a working, talented individual in the industry with regards to everything. So it is the work that you actually put in and your mind. And you have different things to offer to the world, even if you think you don't. But you have to stay with it and do it.
Absolutely. One of the things that one of my YouTube friends told me early on when I was starting on YouTube is he said, if you're confident in your ability, it's not whether or not you will succeed, it's when you will succeed. And I strongly believe that, and that was kind of the mentality that I tried to maintain throughout those first couple of years of really grinding on YouTube. But yeah, definitely agree with that sentiment. Is it okay for you to talk about your new endeavors at all?
I can say that I'm working on stuff, but not what I'm working on exactly.
Okay, maybe I should rephrase that in the sense of not necessarily the work itself, but you did all this incredible work at CD Projekt Red. Can you speak about your decision to leave, what you would like to do going forward?
I think,
now that you've had the most successful, anime in the world.
Well, I think first of all, it just wasn't just me. There was hundreds of people that did it. And I want to point that out because I think it's important. There was people that lost as much sleep as I did for the project. So, but for me, I had these 3 lanes that I kind of know how to do well. One is just a business person that knows how to do licensing, a deal, how to structure a P&L and everything like that. The other is a producer ability of finding talent, building teams, making sure that things get delivered, and if there's problems, solve them.
Right.
And the third is being just a creative that just has ideas and know how to bring them to life.
It's such a unique, in my experience, to have each of those skills. consider myself someone that has a little bit of business knowledge, and I've done a little bit of producer stuff in the past, like at a very, very small level at previous jobs and stuff like that. But I much more feel I'm more on the creative side of things. But for you, do you feel like it's kind of an even balance of all three?
I think.
And is there one that you're most passionate about?
Well, the third part is the one that I want to pursue the most,
Okay.
like being the creative. But I think my most experience is the producer, the business person. And, I've worked with creatives and been a part of creative teams for 10 years in the industry. But me leading such things is way less time. Because the anime, before it really, started, there was like 2 years of trying to do pre-production, and I was in charge of that still. But it was, maybe 1 day a week in that sense. But after that, when real pre-production has started, it was more and more and more, and I became more and more involved and kind of felt that ownership over the whole project because it became real. It wasn't just like, we signed some papers and now it's something, but it really became something, and it started to become real. So my mix of abilities, I want to kind of lean into all of them because I think they make me a better creator, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Because from a production perspective, I'm no longer a dream. Not no longer. I was never a dreamer in the sense of like, I have this great idea. I'll just bring it to the world and this will be it. No, I have to find teams. There are deadlines. It costs money, and you have to find a way to actually make it work because it's just not the only thing that you have a dream and it will magically appear.
Absolutely.
And you have to have the business acumen of persuading people to allow you to do the thing. Because, for example, if I have the most amazing script for a Batman comic book, I still have to go to the owner of the IP and say, I have this amazing idea, and I have to pitch it in a way that they will listen. I'm sure they get tons of emails of like, I have this great Batman idea, right? Of course, notoriety helps. Like I already am established that some people will listen. But at the same time, some won't. So we still have to have that skill of presenting it in a way for this to be a win-win situation. In a sense that I try to assemble my teams, and we talked about it.
Yes.
In a way that it's not only about a job. It's okay. This will elevate the other next thing I want to do, or this was I'm such a huge fan of the IP. I want to work on it regardless of any other circumstances. There's trying to find those people is always a thing that brings me joy in that sense. But I think I have at least 2 dramatic questions that I want to explore in the future.
Okay.
And I want to do stuff with them. But then that's on the creative side. But on the producer side, I want to support people that have those questions and maybe they don't know how to do it. But if the question is cool and I want to know the answer to it as well, I want to help them realize this as well.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think you're in a very unique situation in the sense that because you have all 3 of those skills, even if, hypothetical situation, there's someone that is objectively better at one of these things than you are, because you have experience in all 3, even if they do have this incredible idea, you also have, I don't know if the wherewithal is the right word or not, but you can zoom out enough to see, okay, yeah, the story itself is incredible, but this isn't going to make it to market because of this. And so in that sense, I'm really excited for the next thing that you put out, because you've got everything, you've got your view is wide enough to see everything that needs to be considered in order to make something great.
And I think also I try to lean into my strengths.
Yeah.
Like Japan is my specialty. And because of that, Edgerunners is not a live action TV show, it's an anime. Because I had a bucket list. Until I'm 35, I want to make work on a globally successful video game. I want to make a card game, I want to make a board game, I want to make my own manga, and I want to make my anime. And my bucket list is full. Like I did everything
That's
that I had.
amazing, man.
But it was such a silly thing, right? It's like a guy that lived in a small village in Poland, wants to do those things, and it's preposterous in that sense. But I kind of first started in a different place, and then I tried to find a way to push the boundary a little of like, okay, maybe I'm not a writer yet, but let me co-write something with somebody else. Let me be close to the writers so I can learn from them. Let me try to be as useful as I can with the skills that I currently own to get new skills so I can be even better at the things that I do. Because also from the conversations I'm having with younger people is like, oh, I just want to immediately be a creator and make my own show. It's like, that's not a realistic path to anything. Or at least if you're not the author of Chainsawman, which is like he's 28 and he wrote such amazing pieces already that I'm like in awe with everything that he does. But that's the genius path. Or maybe I think he's a hard worker for sure as well. So it's not, I don't want to reduce him to a genius, but he has a mix that I don't think anybody else maybe in the world has. But my was that I tried to leverage my usefulness to anything that I do. And then because of that, just make a step toward the direction I felt passionate about.
Right.
With keeping a little bit of a safety net in the sense that I still, if none of my creative things will be good from this point on, I did this already. And I also have my, business people will be, I think, needed forever, maybe. So it's like a safe thing that I can do. But I also bring to the table in the sense that it's no longer, I have this, go to a meeting room and say like, this is the idea. But then I say, this is the idea and this is how we execute this idea.
Yes, absolutely.
And this helps a lot into bringing confidence into new crazy projects. Because every single project I did was crazy at first. Like it was never going to become a reality. It was just like, let's explore if this is even a possibility. But because of that, okay, so now I put my producer hat and now I bring my business hat and now I bring my creator hat. I can change those hats. Then my usefulness in the room is high because of it.
Yeah, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for some of those conversations that you must have had at CD Projekt Red, where you're pitching. Maybe we can make a comic out of this. Maybe we can make a board game out of this. Maybe we can make an anime out of this. And because, of course, again, going back to the very business perspective, we have to be realistic with numbers. Yeah, it's a great idea, but we can't make it happen if we're not able to pay the wages necessary.
Sure. The one thing that I would like to say is that I'm so grateful for everybody that watched the show. And, you gave me such high praise, and I'm so happy that people connect to the work. Because I think that the feeling that I've described with Neo Genesis Evangelion is like, if I can be that person to give something new to somebody, just one person in the world, I'll be the happiest ever.
Yeah. If you don't mind me sharing a little bit of the conversation that we had in the car earlier, I've had 3 experiences in my life where I was so moved by a particular piece of art that it changed the course of my life. The first being when I found this Japanese punk band when I was 13 that inspired me to study Japanese. The second being the first time I went to a Shina Ringo Tokyo Jihen concert when I was about to give up writing because it was very hard and I wasn't making a lot of progress. And the third being after watching Edgerunners. All you guys know me as Dōgen, the YouTuber who does, of course, Japanese-related language stuff. But since watching this show, I've decided to try and pursue at the same time this other project that I'm looking forward to sharing with all you guys in the future. So again, I can't praise the show enough. And one other thought that I would like to or try and articulate is that one thing you just mentioned is that the people that didn't necessarily resonate too much with Edgerunners were the audience that maybe weren't in a position where they could relate to the dramatic question. Now, as someone who considers themselves a writer or whatever, I always watch movies and anime or any kind of story with a very analytical eye. And we talked about this a little bit as well, but I try and be super critical when I'm watching basically everything because I try and see what I can learn from that, of course. And that's what blew me away so much about Edgerunners, because normally there's 50 different things that I can think up of that feel a little bit off to me for any content. And you brought up Chainsawman a second ago. Like one example of this is I'm also watching it right now. And
As the whole world is, yes.
yes, as the whole world is. One thing that felt a little bit off to me of the many things that I wrote down in that first episode was Denji is fighting the demon in the first episode. And one of the lines that the demon has is, バラバラにしたのになんでまだ生きてんのか? Kimo. So he says, why are you still alive even though I sliced you up into little bits? And I thought the bit that kind of felt a little bit strange to me, there was two things about that felt a little bit off. One being that is it necessary to pose that question at all as we've just seen it? Is it potentially redundant? Not terribly, but the main thing is that in having the demon use the word kimo, which is kind of like slang, it feels like the demon is cheapened slightly. To me.
I felt when I remember that line, for me it was that it's, and I don't know the intention of the author. I can only,
Of course.
But for me it was like, actually it humanizes the demon in the sense that, oh, demons speak that way because they are as fucked up as humans. And for me, without that, I would think about the demon just as a monster. Once that line arrives, I'm like, okay, so they have this complexity that is only for humans in them themselves. So they might be dumb, they might be smart, but they might be appalled. They might be like, and because of that, I was like, that's an interesting choice to make to potentially pay off later.
Yeah, and I was actually able to reconcile that a little bit with, there's a line towards, I think, the end of the second episode where Hayakawa, another one of the characters, is speaking with Denji after Denji has killed a devil. And Hayakawa basically, he says, well, why didn't you just use your powers to kill him? And Denji says, well, I didn't want to make him suffer unnecessarily. And Hayakawa then comes back and he says, well, don't sympathize with the enemy. Do you want to be friends with the devil? And then this incredible line that Denji then says after that is, well, if a devil wants to be friends with me, then yeah, because I don't have any friends. And that tells us so much about Denji, but it also tells us about the complexity of the devils as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Because I think and that's the brilliance of him as a writer.
Yeah.
In the sense that he's already setting up something that will be way in the future for the series. In the sense that you have to, because I read the whole manga, right?
Okay.
Right now it's volume, like the second coming of Chainsawman for the manga, but I read the whole thing. And later on, without much spoiler, it is a huge dramatic question. It's like, can a person that's terrible be good?
Yeah, it's
and it deepens because of that setup, and because of that deepening of that setup, that is an amazing thing that I as a writer cannot do yet, in a sense that having such a long running thing and having all the tidbits planned out so meticulously, maybe it is something that happens, but from my experience, most likely there was some intuition there, but it might have not been planned out completely. Because planning out such a thing with minute details requires a huge brain. Like not in a capacity way. Because if you write it down, then it becomes the thing that is written down. Either you have it in your brain and you already have the thought process in it. And I think if you are a person like that, you might not have anything else in your life that's happening. You might be obsessed, and then it might be possible. But if you're not, then it might be more intuition than anything else to plant those seeds to really grow later on. Because if you look at George R.R. Martin, for example, he knows where it ends. But the reason why it takes him so long is that he knows what it is, puts the pieces in writing, and then, oh, this feels off. I have to twist this. But because I twisted it, then it has to reconcile something that's already out and written.
Yes.
But also something that he wrote maybe that wasn't public yet, but he can rewrite it. So he's constantly rewriting stuff that he already wrote because he's writing new ideas that he didn't think about while he was writing.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of a conundrum of like a very long piece of media.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Going back to, again, I haven't read Chainsawman, so I don't know how it turns out. I don't know if you're talking about the protagonist or not, and we won't get into spoiler territory. But one of the things that stands out about it so much for me is the way how they kind of flip the typical shonen hero on its head, in the sense that most of these shonen heroes, they come from miserable circumstances, and despite this have strong characters.
Yeah.
To the point where it's without, what would you say?
Foundation.
Yeah, like they have morals to a T.
Yeah.
Whereas there's a great scene in Chainsaw Man where Denji's fighting this kind of bat demon, I think in episode 3.
Episode 3, yeah.
And there's a civilian in the car that gets in the way of the fight, and he just like tosses it out the side.
Yeah. First, the setup is even greater. The bat says, "Oh, you're not going to use the car because there's a human inside." And Denji says, "Oh, fuck that."
Exactly. So the setup is so interesting because it's not that he comes from this miserable circumstance and yet has the strong morals. It's that there are some underlying strong morals, but at least the premise is that he comes from this miserable setup and has atypical morals that we're not used to, but we can still relate despite that, given his struggle within the...
He's a consistently written character, and because of that consistency, it's acceptable for the audience to sympathize with him.
Absolutely. I wrote down exactly what you just said in like my notebook as I'm going through the series right now. But it's just fascinating to be able to speak with someone with your background that is able to... Again, you come from a fundamentally different background than what I do. And going back to one other thing that we said before recording this video is that I live in this world of YouTube. And YouTube is great because, as you mentioned, you have complete creative freedom. You can kind of choose what you want to do, to a certain extent, of course.
Sure.
Your audience does want you to do some things, and you have to kind of navigate that in a certain sense. But I've always been much more interested in making greater art. And again, in that sense, it's wonderful to have this opportunity to speak with you, someone who created something so fantastic. So that might be a good way to end it. I hope that you guys were able to learn some things from our conversation, learn from Rafal. If you haven't seen Edgerunners, or if you haven't read Witcher Ronin, which was his first major creative endeavor, I would highly encourage you to check them both out. Again, for me, my favorite anime since college was always Monster. I'm not sure if you know it or not.
Of course.
Yeah, Dr. Tenma.
Of course.
That was my favorite anime, but...
So we topped Monster?
Yes, for me, like...
Not sure, man. Not sure.
Well, anyway, it immediately became my favorite anime, and I try not to go into too many details about the anime specifically, because you've done that on different interviews, and I would encourage everyone to check it out. But before that, I would say just go watch the anime. It's a masterpiece. It's a landmark, and I can't wait to see what you do next. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking.
Yeah, and we'll see you guys again soon. Sayonara.
Sayonara.